Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 180 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's episode, we are going to be covering a ton of ground. I didn't even know exactly how to describe this conversation, but it is one that is utterly fascinating. So if you've had hormone issues, if you've wondered about your immune system, if you've had concerns or wonder what happens when you go through topical steroid withdrawal and that interaction between your immune system and cortisol with what's happening at the level of your skin, as well as those who are struggling with lots and lots of pollen allergies, we are talking all things immune system. I honestly wish that I could have had my guest talk for another 2 hours. There were moments when I was like, oh my gosh, so many light bulbs are going on in my head. And then being like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how we got here, but I'm so glad that we did. Every single person on my team who got a chance to listen to this interview before it actually aired had the same reaction. It is absolutely brilliant, and you guys are going to love it. So today's guest is returning. Her name is Heather Zwickey. For those of you who have not yet checked out her previous episode here on the Healthy Skin Show, she earned a Ph.D. in Immunology and Microbiology from the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center. She went on to complete a postdoctoral fellowship and teach medical school at Yale University. At the National University of Natural Medicine in Portland, Oregon, Dr. Zwickey launched Helfgott Research Institute and established the School of Graduate Studies, developing programs in research, nutrition, and global health, among others. Dr. Zwickey applies her immunology expertise to natural medicine research, and she currently leads the NIH-funded clinical research training program. She teaches at many universities and speaks at conferences worldwide. So we are very lucky to have her. Let's dive into that conversation. Thank you so much for coming back on the show, Heather. I really appreciate you coming back and sharing your incredible wisdom with the audience.
So fun. I love being here.
I know. The last time we had such a great conversation about inflammation and, you're talking about cytokines and, oh my gosh, you really broke things down well. And I thought you might be, given your background, a really good person to talk about I think in my mind, it feels very complex, a complex relationship between hormones and the immune system. Do you feel like it's a complex relationship?
For sure, it's a complex relationship because there's no one hormone that affects the immune system. They all affect the immune system. And, as women, we have cycles of hormones. And so as we go through various hormone cycles, we see our immunity changing with our cycle. So we absolutely, and when women go through pregnancy, when women go through menopause, we also see huge changes in immunity. So yeah, it's very complex.
Yeah, I feel like this is a great kind of part two from our initial conversation about, what could cause or trigger the immune system to end up in overdrive. So with that said, it's interesting you mentioned the sex hormone piece, which Dr. Carrie Jones had touched on. The relationship between estrogen and your immune system. What are your thoughts on that? Especially we do have a large listenership of women. We do have men listening too. So, and they obviously have
testosterone as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. We want to cover both bases here. And everyone, to be fair, does have both.
Absolutely.
We just have different levels. So let's start with estrogen.
Yeah, so estrogen has profound effects on immunity. Probably the biggest one that we know of is it is capable of increasing our response to infection. Now, if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense because evolutionarily, if women were having constant infections, it would make it very hard for us to continue the species. So what our body has done is it makes women have a higher response in the type of response to bacteria and viruses. And this type of response is called a Th1 response. This is our response to bacteria and viruses, and women make more of it. The problem is that the same response, this Th1 response, is also what drives autoimmunity. So by estrogen increasing our ability to respond to bacteria and viruses, it's also increased our risk for autoimmune disease. Now, what's interesting about that is testosterone has the opposite effect. Testosterone decreases Th1. So men have less autoimmune disease than women, and men are less able to respond to viruses than women. There's a difference between bacteria and virus, and it turns out that men can respond better to bacteria and women respond better to virus. And we know the receptors that cause that, but we don't know the evolutionary advantage of that as of yet. But I think that this probably resulted as an evolutionary advantage, but in our modern society, what it's manifesting as is women having more autoimmunity than men. And in some autoimmune diseases, it's high. It's like MS, it's 9-1. Yeah.
So 9 women to 1 man.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Whereas in rheumatoid arthritis, it's more like 4-1. But it's not 2-1 in any of the autoimmune diseases. It's 4, 7, 9-1 women to men, and it is a result of estrogen.
And how so? Is it that we have just higher levels of estrogen, or women, when a woman, say, has a state of estrogen dominance? Like, what would be, could you give us an example?
So estrogen having this particular effect on the immune system is true for all women, because all women have more estrogen than testosterone. Now, we know, for example, you ready to have your mind blown?
Okay, always.
Woman gets pregnant, her estrogen decreases and her progesterone goes up. And guess what? If she has an autoimmune disease, it goes into remission. So,
what? Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so progesterone is protective because, again, what we're doing is that at that point, we're decreasing, once you're pregnant, we're decreasing your immune response so you don't reject the fetus. So
the wheels of my brain are turning. So wait, can I just ask a quick question here? Could this possibly explain why someone experiencing like eczema or psoriasis, although psoriasis is more considered an autoimmune disease, there are instances where women will have really bad rashes, really bad, and then they get pregnant and it goes away.
Boom, gone.
And then they have the baby and sometimes it comes back. Is that possibly why?
Mm-hmm. It's exactly what's happening. We see it with psoriasis. We see it with MS, multiple sclerosis. We see it with diabetes, that when women get pregnant and their estrogen decreases and their progesterone increases, now that autoimmune disease goes into remission. Unfortunately, the moment that you have the baby, right, now your progesterone is gone, and now the hormone that kicks in is called prolactin, so that you lactate, so you feed the child. And prolactin is almost stronger than estrogen at driving this particular immune response. So if you're not fully in remission, when the immune system comes back online, you have a huge increase. And think about it. This is a woman who's trying to take care of a baby, and we're trying to increase the immune response so that she has all of the immunological factors in her breast milk that she can share with the infant. So it's like she's having a larger response post-pregnancy than she had pre-pregnancy, so that she can provide the immune system for the child.
My mind feels like I feel like we could end right now, and I would have to stew on this. We're not going to stop because we have more to talk about, but like that, wow. Mm-hmm. So, and would this also explain why, like maybe because you are growing a child, you don't want your immune system on overdrive to attack that tissue? Right. Is that okay?
And in fact, we know that women who develop preeclampsia and are at risk of rejecting their birth, it's because they haven't shut down that immune response enough. they're still having this Th1 response. So it's very good evidence to suggest that if you can't shut it down, you can't maintain a birth.
Okay, so I think I want to ask you another question. It might be a simplistic question, but I think it'd be helpful for the listeners. What exactly is Th1 and Th2? Like what is that?
Yeah.
If somebody reads that and they're like, I don't know what we're talking about here. Is it a cell, like a hormone? What is that?
So a Th1 response is a set of cells and proteins that are designed to respond to bacteria and virus. And a Th2 response is a set of cells and proteins designed to respond to worms and parasites. And your body is constantly balancing between being able to respond to bacteria and viruses or being able to respond to worms and parasites. Now, in the United States, we don't have a lot of worms anymore. We've managed to eliminate those little guys from our guts. And so instead of mounting a Th2 response to worms, we mount that response to pollen and cat dander and all sorts of things that we have allergies to. So what we see in the United States is our balance is between bacteria and viruses or allergies. And that's this balance that we go back and forth between Th1 and Th2. Now, Th1 response is the response you want to have. If you are going to fight off COVID, if you are going to fight off the flu, you want to be able to have that response, but you want to be able to mount the response, hold it for as long as you have an infection, and then go back to normal. And unfortunately, what happens with some situations is that if estrogen is overly dominant, you keep mounting that Th1 response. Now, if you also have an autoreactive cell in your body, so you have a cell, all of these cells are made in the bone marrow. And we're talking the bone marrow of your flat bones. So think like jaw, pelvis, flat bones. So if you have a cell that escapes from your bone marrow that happens to be specific for your pancreas instead of specific for a virus, you could activate that cell and it will attack your pancreas and you get diabetes. Okay, so
yes,
the specificity of the cells matter too. It's not just whether you have estrogen, it's also whether you have a cell that's like a rogue cell that's hanging out in your body that's ready to respond to self.
Okay, so I want to go back a second because you brought up the issue of pollen.
Yes.
And worms.
Yes.
And so you're not the first person who has mentioned this to me, that there's this interesting connection between the two.
There is.
I have a lot of listeners that struggle with excessive environmental allergens, especially to pollen and whatnot, especially with eczema. There's the triad of asthma, allergies, and eczema. Can you talk a little bit more about the Th2 response to pollen? Like, just flesh that out for people. I think they'd really love to hear more.
Yeah. So what we call those people who have all of those things, they have the response to pollen, they've got the eczema, they've got asthma, they've got all of these allergies. We call those people Th2 dominant, meaning that their response in the Th2 realm is much higher than their response to viruses and bacteria. Now, why does that happen? We know there's a number of reasons that it happens. One reason is that we are excessively clean in our society. And we've become even more clean as we have become the hand sanitizer junkies from COVID, right?
Yes.
Like, I've seen patients who come in whose hands are completely dry and shriveled because they are using so much hand sanitizer. The issue is that there has to be this balance between infection and what used to be worms, but is now allergies. And if you're not getting enough infections, you're going to have severe allergies. We call this the hygiene hypothesis, that we are too clean. And where this research came from is Japan. Japan is excessively clean. And they discovered that when they were becoming more and more clean, more and more allergies start to appear. Okay, so being too clean is not good. Get yourself a pet and lick your dog. I'm not kidding.
Not literally.
Yes,
Really?
literally. Lick your dog. Give them good kisses, because we need to be exposed to microbes. And people who have pets have less allergies. People who have siblings have less allergies. People who live in the country on farms who are exposed to dirt and mud and animals have less allergies. We are too clean. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
Okay?
Second thing.
So second thing, we don't like to get sick, right?
True.
We don't like to get sick. And yet it's actually healthy to get sick a couple times each year.
Really?
Yeah, because we're trying to balance our Th1 and our Th2. So a couple of times a year, if you get an infection, you get the flu or you get a cold, and that's actually good for your immune system because it's starting to bring things back into balance. So again, the folks who are atopic tend to be out of balance. They're not getting enough of this Th1 response.
So when there were more worm infections, which frankly, I'm going to be honest, is gross to think about, but it is what it is. So when we were more exposed to worms,
we didn't have allergies.
Oh. Worms versus allergies.
Well, so this is not an unusual conversation for us to have in the natural medicine community. In fact, we had it in class this morning. Some people are actually using helminths to treat their allergies.
Yes, I was gonna ask you about that. So for people who don't know what a helminth is, what is that?
It's an intestinal worm. So you actually eat this worm and it goes into your intestine. And then it lives there. And your immune system is distracted by the worm. And it's going to direct all of its Th2-ness to the worm, and your allergies go away. It actually works. Now,
I would say if you guys could all see my face, my face right
really
now, I'm like, oh my,
right.
You know what? It's funny because there was a woman, her name was Misty, and she was a really big proponent of looking for alternative options for scleroderma. And she was a big proponent of that. And she actually passed away earlier this year. And I remember that she was posting about, because she had scleroderma, she was going through the process of attempting to basically use quote unquote helminth therapy in order to try to see if she could, I don't know, I guess manipulate her immune system.
A lot of people are using this. Now, some people are using it to make their allergies go away, because having a worm infection does cause a Th2 response, but it also helps balance the Th1, Th2. So some people are using helminth therapy for their autoimmune disease. Because if they have way too much Th1, by using a worm, they can bring it down and bring the Th1 and Th2 into balance. Now, needless to say, you can't walk outside in bare feet these days and get yourself a worm like you can in many countries with economic resources. Yeah. And often when I come back from Africa, I will have worms, right? Like this is not common in the United States, but it is common in many other countries that you get intestinal worms. We just deworm you, like you give a anti-worm pill to your dog. Same thing for a human. It's really easy to deworm yourself. You take one pill and the worms are dead. It's very different to use worms therapeutically. You don't get a huge infection. Usually people, when they do worm therapy, they're using 5 to 8 worms. And they're using worms that have been engineered to not divide. So the worms live in their intestine for usually up to 3 years, and then they die off. And then you would have to take another dose.
Wow.
Yeah.
And are they big worms?
I'm
just thinking about swallowing a worm.
No, they're not the size of an earthworm. They're more the size of a pin, like a pin that you might have a quilting pin.
Okay.
Yeah, they're tiny. You can't see them.
All right, that makes it a little better.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we've got this.
We went from estrogen to worms.
To work to allergies. Oh my
Well,
gosh.
and this is also one of the reasons that we have allergies is we've made ourselves so clean that in countries that have worms endemically, there are no allergies. You don't have allergies. So in being so clean, we now have allergies.
So what happens to someone, for example, who becomes really sensitive to, I'm not sure if you probably are familiar, like almost like allergic to their progesterone?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things again that are going on here, but estrogen and progesterone work in concert with each other. They aren't working individually. So estrogen upregulates progesterone, which then will downregulate estrogen again. So it's this positive, then negative feedback loop. And so if you are using progesterone and now it's going to change your estrogen concentration, like you can actually develop an allergy to anything, and you can develop an allergy to your progesterone. So yeah, it's all linked.
It's complicated.
And in some people, we actually see that estrogen, instead of increasing Th1, that antivirus response, in some people, it can increase Th2, the allergy response. We don't know the difference yet. We don't know why in this person is it increasing this one type of immune response, and the other person, it's increasing a different one.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's complex.
It is very complex. And I just also want to just say, this is not what I don't want someone to do is say, oh, I should run out and get topical progesterone.
No.
Like that, you never, ever supplement with hormones on your own. That is a bad idea. Yes.
For supplementing with hormones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that hormones trigger all sorts of different pathways. Any one hormone is going to affect around 100 different pathways in your body. So you may think, well, I'm going to take progesterone so that I can make my autoimmune disease better. And in taking progesterone, you have now stimulated all of these other pathways. So you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
However, I will tell you that there's a clinical trial that's happening right now using testosterone to reduce autoimmunity. Because remember, testosterone has the opposite effect of estrogen. So for people with autoimmunity, they're doing testosterone patches, kind of like a nicotine patch, to see if they can reduce autoimmune reactivity.
Wow. That's pretty neat. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I have one more. I want to ask you about cortisol.
Okay.
Because I think that, well, you can tell me, do you feel like cortisol has an impact on the immune system?
Yeah, the Nobel Prize was won in 1956 for the effects of cortisol on the immune system.
Well, there we go.
Absolutely has an effect.
So what would that impact be, especially, and so consider too that a lot of my listeners have had exposure to topical steroids, which is man-made cortisol. Yeah. So what's that relationship like? So
cortisol is interesting, right? Because here's this hormone that's our stress hormone that wakes us up in the morning and then decreases the rest of the day. But when we're stressed, we get this acute burst of cortisol. And that acute stress causes your immune system to go to your skin. Okay? Now I want you to think about that. Why would that happen? If you were stressed in an acute way, historically, stress was the running from the lion, right?
Right.
What happens if the lion catches you? Where do you need your immune system? You need it in the skin.
In the skin, yeah, the exterior, because that's what's going to be pierced.
That's right. And that's what would have happened in war. You would need your immune system in your skin because that's going to be where you might be injured. And so as an acute stressor, if you take a high dose of cortisol immediately, what will happen is your immune system goes to your skin. What you might experience is redness as there's an increase in blood flow to get your immune system to your skin. You might experience swelling, those sorts of things. Now, most people who are taking cortisol or using a topical corticosteroid cream are using it chronically. And our chronic expression of immunity with cortisol is different. Your immune system doesn't stay in your skin over a long period of time. Eventually, it's going to go back. But what cortisone does is it suppresses the immune system. So, okay.
Right.
So
yes. Yep. Totally fine. I'm with you there.
Right. Yes. Yeah,
Gotcha.
so we know that we'll give people shots of prednisone, right? If we want to suppress an autoimmune reaction, we give them a particular derivative of a glucocorticoid to do that. And what that means is it's suppressing all of your T cells, all of your B cells. Yeah. Depending on the dose, it can mean that you could get an infection and not respond, right?
Oh,
Now,
so that might explain why, too, people could develop recurrent infections on their skin.
absolutely. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to suppress an inflammatory response. And when you suppress that inflammatory response, it's great. Your acne goes away, your psoriasis goes away. But you're suppressing your immune system so that it can't respond to other things. So now if you get a new infection, that infection starts and you're not responding to it because you've got this corticosteroid that is suppressing things. Make sense?
It does. Yes, I'm with you.
Okay. So over a long period of time, what cortisol does is it causes an immunosuppression effect.
And then, so let me just recap because I'm working through this in my mind too, because this is complicated.
It is.
So your adrenals produce cortisol. Cortisol gets the immune system out to the skin. But
In an acute situation.
An acute situation. But when we chronically apply a man-made cortisol or hydrocortisone, we're suppressing or lowering the immune system response in that region, or is it as a whole?
Well, usually for a topical, it's going to be mostly to the region.
Okay. So that means that our skin is not able to, our immune system may not be able to mount a response if, say, you come in contact with staph or strep or fungal organisms, etc. So what happens then if you've had long-term chronic exposure of this man-made stress hormone, essentially, on the top of the skin layer, and then you stop? And now all of a sudden you're experiencing, the symptoms that you described earlier of the redness, the water retention,
Here
everything.
comes your immune system because it's trying to come back, right? And so you're out of balance one direction where everything's suppressed. So now you stop and immediately everything's like coming back, right? Because it's got a screen like, what's happened? Well, I've been gone.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So you will see usually a major rash that will form because your immune system is trying to come back in full.
Oh boy. So for anybody listening to this and who has wondered, I mean, we've talked quite a bit about topical steroid withdrawal, but if you've wondered what exactly is going on,
that's what
now we're in the know. Heather, thank you for explaining that because this is complicated and people suffer for a really long time with this.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why when you are removing a topical steroid that you've been taking for a long time, you want to do it gradually, right? You don't want to just stop. Because if you just stop, your immune system is going to come back in full force and it's going to attack just to make sure that you haven't encountered anything while it was away. So,
well, can I ask a question? Why do you think it is? And it's okay if you don't have like a concrete answer, or maybe it's just your opinion. Why maybe some people who end up in this situation, like for them, the journey could be several months of going through this, we'll say, immune system reorientation, also known as TSW. But for some people, it's years.
Yeah, so there's another thing that is happening at the level of the microbiome. So when you're wearing, and I assume your listeners know microbiome.
Yes, they do.
Okay, so I'm thinking not just skin microbiome, but when you're applying a topical steroid, there's going to be a skin microbiome effect. We know the skin microbiome and the gut microbiome interact with each other. And so the health of the gut is going to have a very strong effect on the health of the skin. And the metabolites of the microbes in the gut are one of the things that will help calm the skin.
Okay.
Okay? Because they share metabolites. The microbes on the skin make many of the same metabolites that the microbes on the gut do. So honestly, the people who have the longer reactions tend to have dysbiosis in their gut. And they are not making the same short chain fatty acids and microbial metabolites that they need for their skin to heal. Their gut isn't healing either, right?
You know, it was interesting. I had a acupuncturist come on, and she said in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, she's like, you know, when you see this permeability and this leakiness and a compromised skin barrier, oftentimes we see that also with the barrier running through us, which is our gut. Yeah. And it's not uncommon. We become reactive to everything. It feels like it's food, and it feels like it's just everything you touch. And your circadian rhythm, especially in these chronic situations of like TSW, where the circadian rhythm is even off. You can't sleep at night. You're incredibly depressed. Your hair starts falling out. I mean, it's really awful stuff.
It is. And it's not just the skin and the gut. What's the other major barrier? Brain, the blood-brain barrier. And so now we're starting to see things are becoming more permeable in the blood-brain barrier when the gut barrier is permeable and the skin barrier is permeable, because they're all the same proteins. It's all the same thing that holds those cells close together. And if those cells aren't being held close together in the gut, they're also not being held close together in the skin, and they're not being held close together in the brain.
And so that might explain some of the emotional impact that people start to feel. I mean, granted, it's really upsetting for most people to lose their hair. And I don't think we can diminish the feeling of that and not being able to sleep. But that is a huge factor in feeling well if your brain isn't almost like sealed from the outside world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Wow. We went all over the place today.
We always seem to do that.
I have to tell you and I feel like I have such great conversations. I have to like marinate on this, and then I want to have you come back if you'd be open and willing to, because I feel like this again is just such an enlightening conversation. And I really do think that people are going to appreciate hearing this. It's refreshing. It's new, but it's not, I guess. It's new to us. And it's helpful to understand when people are like, I don't get why this is happening to me. I don't understand why my body feels like it's turned against me. And this helps explain some of it.
So the only thing that I would add is that this piece around the health of our microbiome is critical for skin health. It's critical. And I'm doing a lecture for the Integrative Dermatology Symposium that's starting, this week. It's recorded, so I don't remember when mine is. But it's all about this relationship between the gut and the skin. And if you're having problems with your skin, go to your gut. You're going to find an answer.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a big piece of the puzzle. Many of my clients will go, yep, that's what Jen told me. Big piece. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for being here. We'll put all of your contact information over in the show notes so everyone can find you and connect with you. And I so deeply appreciate you coming back and sharing all of these knowledge bombs with us, because for those of you who are just listening to this, like my face many times was like, what? And I'm sure many of you share that sentiment, like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And the worm thing, I'm working through that. That's going to take me a little time.
We'll talk about it again.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you guys are having a very strong reaction to this show, just like I did, especially as we were recording it. Dr. Zwickey and I were actually doing this via a video call. And so I know you guys haven't seen it because this is audio, but my face at times, especially when she's discussing the parasites, was just, we'll just say priceless. So I'm imagining you had probably a very similar response. But either way, this was incredibly informative. And for those of you looking for more information and some of the resources that we discussed, you can head on over to skinterrupt.com/180 to get access to all of that information. And you can leave your questions and comments there so we can keep the conversation going. And if you found this episode really informative, I invite you to share it because someone else can absolutely benefit from hearing this information. That's what this is all about. We share together to help educate our community. Last but not least, make sure to head on over to your podcast platform of choice, review the show, and then hit the subscribe button. That way you don't miss out on any potential inspiration, new research, and hope that we share every single week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.